Following God's orders, I sent 10 terrible plagues upon the people of Egypt to free my people, Israel, from slavery. Hello, I am Moses, and my life is a great adventure of faith and miracles. I was raised in the royal palace, but I had to flee to the desert after killing an Egyptian who was beating my Hebrew brothers. After 40 years of shepherding sheep, God himself appeared to me in the flame of a burning bush and said, "I am who I am, and I will send you to free my people." After the last plague and the loss of his son, the Pharaoh allowed us to leave, but soon we found ourselves trapped between the Red Sea and the Egyptian army coming after us to destroy us. There we once again saw God's great power as he parted the waters so we could pass safely while our enemies drowned, left behind in our past forever. I invite you to stay until the end to learn the complete story of my life and gain valuable lessons for your spiritual growth. I am Moses, and my story doesn't begin with a war cry but with the soft cry of a baby on the banks of the Nile River. I was born at a time of great anguish for my people, the Jews, who were suffering under the oppression of a ruthless pharaoh in Egypt. This pharaoh, fearful that our growing population would rebel, ordered that all Jewish male infants be killed at birth. My mother, a woman of unwavering faith, devised a bold plan to save me. She placed me in a basket coated with tar and hid me among the reeds of the river. Unexpectedly, it was the pharaoh's daughter, the princess, who found me. Moved by compassion, she decided to adopt me without knowing that I was Jewish. Thus, I grew up in the corridors of power as a prince of Egypt, educated in all wisdom, but unaware of my true origins. The Egypt of my childhood was a place of splendor and contrasts. The great pyramids and temples showcased human ingenuity, while under the shadow of these monumental structures, my Jewish brothers worked tirelessly as slaves. This mix of grandeur and oppression shaped my view of the world from a young age. Over time, the truth about my origins began to surface. I felt torn between the luxury of the palace and the evident suffering of my people. Understanding this duality filled me with questions about justice, destiny, and God. Why are some born to suffer and others to rule? What was my place in this world? The answer to these questions came the day I saw an Egyptian overseer beating a Jewish slave. Something inside me awakened, a righteous anger that I could not contain. In an impulsive act, I ended the life of that oppressor, and that moment changed my destiny forever. With the weight of that action on my shoulders, I knew I could no longer stay at the Pharaoh's court. Thus began my exile into the unknown. As I reflect on this first stage of my life, I invite you to think about your own beginnings. We all face challenges that shape us, often as a result of our circumstances and decisions. How has your origin influenced the person you are today? Like me on the banks of the Nile, each of us has the opportunity to grow and change, often in ways we never imagined. On the edge of the burning desert of Midian, I found an unexpected refuge, distancing myself from the shadow that had followed me from Egypt. My life as a prince had ended abruptly after an impulsive act of justice, leaving me fleeing in fear and alone. Here in this dry and distant land, I transitioned from courtier to humble shepherd. It was in this great silence that I truly began to encounter God. During these years, the solitude of the desert became my constant companion, teaching me patience and resilience. I married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, the priest of Midian, who accepted me as his son. Through him, I learned the traditions and beliefs of Midian, which, though different, resonated with the promises made to my Jewish ancestors. One day, while tending my flock near Mount Horeb, something extraordinary occurred that would change my life forever. A burning bush caught my attention. It was on fire, but surprisingly, it was not consumed. God's voice came from the bush, calling me by name. "Moses, Moses," he said. In fear, I responded, "Here I am." God revealed himself to me as the God of my ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. His voice carried the weight of wisdom and authority, and his message was clear. He ordered me to return to Egypt to free my people from slavery. Despite my fears and doubts, he promised to be with me, giving me signs and words to convince not only the people of Israel but also the powerful Pharaoh. That experience on Mount Horeb was more than a startling vision. It was a spiritual transformation and a call to service. God gave me a staff with which to perform miracles, a symbol of his power and presence. He also taught me what to say and do, preparing me for the challenges I would face. As you reflect on my calling, I invite you to consider the moments in your life when you have felt a clearer sense of direction or purpose. Often, it is in the silence of our personal struggles that we hear the call to action more clearly. Do not underestimate the challenges or difficulties you face. They may be the prelude to something great, a preparation for a role that only you can fulfill. How do you respond when you are called? With God's staff in my hand and His word burning in my heart, I returned to Egypt with my brother Aaron. The years had changed the landscape of my youth, but the oppression on my people remained the same, or perhaps worse. My mission was to confront the Pharaoh, the same man who might have played with me in the palace gardens, and ask him to let the Israelites go free. The Pharaoh's court was a display of power and luxury. When Aaron and I presented ourselves, we were met with skepticism and mockery. "Who is God that I should obey His voice and let Israel go?" he said to us. To respond, we demonstrated God's power. Aaron threw his staff on the ground, and it turned into a serpent. Though the court magicians did the same, our message was clear: we were not there on our own behalf. The Pharaoh's rejection set off a series of events that would leave a deep mark on Egypt. The 10 plagues that followed were not just manifestations of God's power, but also direct judgments against the Egyptian gods. Each plague attacked the authority of an Egyptian deity, from Hapi, the god of the Nile, affected when the water turned to blood, to Ra, the sun god, who was eclipsed by the darkness that covered the land. These events were shocking. Frogs, lice, and flies invaded every corner of the Egyptian homes. Livestock died, the Egyptians suffered from boils, and a devastating hailstorm destroyed the fields. However, each plague stopped at the borders of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, clearly showing God's protection over my people. The 10th and final plague, the death of Egypt's firstborns, was the most painful. Despite all the previous suffering, it was necessary to break the Pharaoh's resistance. That night, while Egypt wept, the Israelites marked their doors with the blood of the Passover lamb, which assured them salvation and freedom. As I reflect on the plagues and their impact, I invite you to think about the struggles in your life. Often, we believe that the pharaohs and plagues we face are immovable and permanent. However, the story of the plagues teaches us about perseverance in adversity and faith in the promise of deliverance. What chains do you need to break in your life? How can you show faith and determination to overcome the obstacles that stand in your way to freedom? After the devastating 10th plague, the Pharaoh finally relented. Under the cover of night, I led my people out of Egypt. It was a massive exodus of souls hungry for freedom, but still burdened by the weight of generations of slavery. Although we had left, the Pharaoh's heart hardened once again, and his chariots pursued us, determined to return us to the chains we had just broken. We found ourselves trapped between the advancing Egyptian army and the still waters of the Red Sea. Faced with what seemed like certain doom, I raised my staff over the water, obeying God's instructions. In an act of divine power that would resonate through the ages, the waters parted, raising a wall on each side and revealing a dry path. With hearts pounding and a mix of fear and faith, my people crossed the sea. Behind us, the Egyptian army recklessly followed the same route. But as soon as our last man reached the opposite shore, the waters returned to their place, swallowing chariots, horses, and soldiers, marking the end of our pursuit. Then, guided by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, we arrived at Mount Sinai. Here, in the imposing majesty of this sacred mountain, God descended to meet His people. The mountain trembled under the weight of His presence, and from the smoking summit, I delivered the 10 Commandments to Israel, the cornerstones of our new life as a free nation. The law we received was not just a set of rules, but a way of life that distinguished us from the nations around us. These commandments covered everything from the sanctity of marriage to respect for life and property, consolidating a moral and social system that promoted justice and compassion among us. As you reflect on these significant events, I invite you to think about the moments when you have faced your own Red Seas and deserts. Often, the greatest obstacles offer the greatest opportunity for faith and testify to a higher power. How do you react in moments of despair? Are you seeking the guidance and deliverance that can only come from something or someone greater than yourself? Just as we were at the foot of Sinai, each of us is called to listen attentively and follow courageously the principles that guide our lives toward freedom and justice. After receiving the laws on Mount Sinai, my life and that of my people continued in the desert. For 40 years, I led the Israelites through vast and often unforgiving deserts. During this time, we not only faced the lack of food and water, but also the constant challenge of maintaining faith in God's promises. One of the most critical moments occurred when the people, impatient with the delay and uncertainty of their destiny, decided to create a golden calf idol. This act of idolatry was a devastating blow to our covenant with God, who had freed us with great power. My reaction was to break the tablets of the law as a sign that they had broken their covenant with God. However, after interceding for them, I climbed Mount Sinai once again to receive a second set of tablets, a testament to God's infinite mercy and patience. During these years, we built important structures for our community life, including the tabernacle, a sacred place where God's presence dwelled among his people. We ordained priests and celebrated festivals that reminded us of who we were and whom we worshipped. Our journey was not just physical, but deeply spiritual. We learned about holiness, obedience, and dependence on God. Personally, I faced moments of doubt and disappointment, especially when the Promised Land always seemed so far away. My own faith was tested and strengthened in the heat of the desert. At the end of my life, I found myself on Mount Nebo, contemplating the Promised Land I was not permitted to enter. This prohibition was the result of a moment of weakness when I disobeyed God by striking a rock to bring forth water instead of speaking to it as he had instructed. Despite this limitation, I felt no bitterness. God allowed me to see the vastness and beauty of the land that our children would possess, and I knew that my journey, though incomplete, had fulfilled a greater purpose. As I reflect on my life and its end, I invite you to think about your own journeys. Life often takes us through deserts and asks us to lead others, even if we never see all our hopes and efforts realized. How do you face long-term challenges? Can you find satisfaction in the achievements of the community and the legacy you have left, even if you do not personally reap all the fruits of your labor? In giving and serving, we find the true meaning of our existence. My name is Moses, and this is my story. From my humble beginnings on the Nile to my final days contemplating the Promised Land from Mount Nebo, I have experienced moments of profound challenge and extraordinary wonder. Throughout my life, I have learned valuable lessons that I hope can illuminate your path as well. As I reflect on my life, I invite you to consider how these lessons might apply to your own spiritual experience. Obedience to God, humility before his will, and perseverance in faith are principles that can support and guide you in times of uncertainty and challenges. Whatever obstacles you face, remember that the same God who parted the Red Sea and spoke from Mount Sinai is with you, guiding you to your promised land. May my story inspire you to trust God more deeply and follow his ways with a firm heart and willing mind. Because at the end of our journey, what we carry with us are not just the memories of battles won or lost, but the peace of knowing that we have obeyed his call. I invite you to tap the screen to watch the recommended video about the incredible story of Peter, the passionate disciple of Jesus. Discover how he went from being a simple fisherman to becoming a key leader of the early church, with his moments of doubt and unshakable faith. Join us on this fascinating journey full of miracles and life lessons that continue to inspire millions of people around the world. Don't miss it.